What if everything you thought you knew about the justice system was wrong? Imagine a courtroom where an underdog, a 14-year-old boy, is mocked, dismissed, and expected to fail. But what if that same boy held the power to dismantle corruption and expose the truth? In the next 30 minutes, you'll witness an inspiring battle against injustice, proving that intelligence and courage have no age limit. Stay tuned, because this is a story you won't forget. Location: New York City country, United States. The grand courtroom was packed, chandeliers casting a glow over the polished wooden benches. Spectators filled the gallery, a mix of reporters, analysts, and curious citizens eager for what they assumed would be a spectacle. A hushed murmur rippled through the crowd. Every eye in the room was fixed on the young boy standing at the center. At the center of the room stood Malik Carter, a 14-year-old boy dressed in a crisp button-up shirt and slacks. His hands gripped a legal pad tightly, but his posture remained firm. He was young, but there was a fire in his eyes. He had not come here to be mocked or dismissed. He had come here to fight. Judge Grayson, a stern man in his 60s, leaned forward from the bench, peering down at Malik over his reading glasses. A smirk curled on his lips. He had seen many defendants before, but never one like this. "Malik, do you even understand the gravity of this case?" he asked, his tone dripping with condescension. Laughter erupted from the spectators, the snickers of attorneys, the amused whispers of journalists. A few reporters jotted down notes, already drafting tomorrow's headlines. The young boy was already a spectacle, an amusement, nothing more. But Malik remained unfazed. He adjusted his glasses and cleared his throat. When he spoke, his voice was steady, unwavering. "With all due respect, Your Honor, I understand it better than anyone here." The laughter died instantly. The room shifted. Reporters glanced at one another. The attorneys leaned forward. The air grew thick with intrigue. The boy was not here to crumble. He was here to make them listen. Judge Grayson eyed the boy. His smirk faded just slightly. He straightened in his chair, his expression hardening. "Very well. Proceed." Malik stepped forward, the courtroom now utterly silent. He flipped through the pages of his legal pad and began. "For too long, the justice system has failed people like me. People who do not have power. People who do not have money. People who are told they do not belong in rooms like this. Today, I intend to prove that not only do I belong here, but that the truth must be heard." A murmur rolled through the crowd. The judge watched him carefully. The opposing attorneys, seated at their polished wooden table, glanced at one another, suddenly less certain of their victory. Malik took a breath, his grip on the legal pad tightening. "The prosecution would like you to believe that the law is clear, that the evidence is undeniable. But what they fail to acknowledge is the context, the real story, and I am here to tell it." The courtroom was still. Reporters scrambled to capture every word. The jury sat up, some tilting their heads intrigued. Malik glanced around, meeting the eyes of the jury. He saw skepticism, doubt, but also curiosity. He took a step closer. "Before we proceed, let me ask you something. If I were older, wealthier, or from a different neighborhood, would I even be standing here right now?" The jury members shifted in their seats. The judge drummed his fingers against the bench. Malik let the silence linger, the weight of the moment sinking in. He let them sit with the question, let them feel the discomfort of it. He turned his attention to the prosecution's lead attorney, Mr. Coldwell, a sharp-dressed man in his 40s. Coldwell smirked, arms crossed, but there was tension in his posture. "Objection, Your Honor. Is the defendant delivering a speech or making a legal argument? Judge Grayson studied Malik for a long moment. The boy did not flinch, did not waver. He stood firm. Overruled. I would like to hear what he has to say. Coldwell's smirk faded. Malik suppressed his own smile, knowing he had won a small victory. He cleared his throat and continued. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, today you will hear facts. You will hear arguments. But what I ask of you is simple. Listen. Listen with the understanding that justice is not just about laws. It is about truth. And today, that truth is on trial, just as much as I am. Silence. The weight of his words lingered in the air. The judge leaned back. Reporters furiously took notes. The spectators, who had laughed moments before, now sat forward, hanging on to every word. The prosecutor adjusted his tie, suddenly more aware of the shifting mood in the room. A reporter whispered something to his colleague. The bailiff, standing by the door, watched intently. Even Judge Grayson, who had begun this case with a smirk, seemed more reserved. The battle had only begun. Where are you watching from, and what time is it? Let us know in the comments. Malik's neighborhood was a rough place, where legal aid was scarce, and justice often seemed out of reach. He grew up watching his mother work tirelessly, drafting documents late into the night just to make ends meet. The weight of survival pressed against their home, but she never wavered. She carried the burden with quiet resilience, her hands ink-stained from legal documents, her exhaustion masked by determination. Malik's fascination with law began at an early age. Late at night, while his mother pored over case files, he would sneak peeks at her notes, trying to decipher the intricate language of justice. His curiosity deepened as he watched high-profile trials on television, drawn to the way attorneys built arguments, the way words shaped fate. He admired the precision of legal proceedings, but most of all, he recognized the power law had, the ability to protect or to destroy. His admiration turned into obsession when he saw firsthand how that power could be manipulated. His older brother, James, was the pride of their family. A brilliant student with scholarships on the horizon, he had a future bright enough to illuminate the entire neighborhood. But all of that was ripped away when he was accused of a crime he did not commit. James's conviction was swift. The system did not care about evidence, about the truth. The defense was inadequate, and the judge seemed more concerned with efficiency than justice. Behind the scenes, Malik would later learn, a powerful businessman named Victor Grant had orchestrated it all. With influence and deep pockets, Grant ensured that James became a scapegoat, a convenient casualty in a web of corruption. Malik sat in that courtroom, his small hands clenched into fists, as his brother was led away in handcuffs. He did not cry. He did not scream. But something inside him hardened. He understood then that knowing the law was not enough. One had to wield it. From that moment on, he dedicated himself to studying every legal book he could get his hands on. Without formal training, he taught himself the intricacies of defense strategies, precedents, and courtroom tactics. Every spare moment was spent memorizing legal codes, dissecting trial transcripts, and understanding the mechanics of justice. His mother worried, urging him to have a childhood, but he could not turn away. The fight was personal. At school, while others focused on sports or socializing, Malik buried himself in legal research. He read case after case, learning from the victories and failures of seasoned attorneys. He practiced arguments in front of the mirror, refining his delivery, making sure he would one day be ready. Then came Mr. Peterson, a close family friend, a man who had always looked out for them, accused of fraud. The evidence was shaky, the charges suspicious. The pattern was eerily familiar. Malik dug deeper and uncovered a link to Victor Grant. It was happening again, another innocent man being forced through a rigged system. Malik knew this case was different. This time, he had a chance to fight back. If he could prove Mr. Peterson's innocence, he might finally unravel the corruption that had destroyed his brother's life. This was not just about one case, it was about redemption, about justice, about proving that the law could still serve those without power. The weight of the case pressed on his shoulders, but he did not falter. Every night, he studied legal procedures, combing through documents, looking for weaknesses in the prosecution's case. His mother watched him with a mix of concern and pride. She saw the fire in his eyes, the same fire that once burned in James's before it was extinguished by injustice. His days were spent gathering evidence, reaching out to anyone who might help. He found inconsistencies in the case against Mr. Peterson, small details that had been overlooked, much like what had happened with James. The deeper he dug, the more he saw how flawed the system truly was. He could feel the weight of expectation, the doubt from those who did not believe a 14-year-old had any place in a courtroom. But he did not care. He had prepared for this moment his entire life, and he would not let fear stand in his way. And so, with the determination set in stone, he readied himself for the battle ahead. Malik discovered a loophole in the prosecution's argument, an obscure case law buried deep within legal history. It was a technicality, but one that could change everything. If applied correctly, it would challenge the very foundation of the prosecution's case. However, presenting it to the court would not be easy. It was not just about knowing the law, it was about convincing the court to listen. As the trial progressed, Malik faced growing resistance. The prosecution viewed him as nothing more than an inconvenience, a child playing lawyer. They filed a motion to have him removed from the case, arguing that he was unqualified. The judge, hesitant but bound by legal protocol, scheduled a special hearing to determine whether Malik could continue representing Mr. Peterson. The courtroom was tense on the day of the hearing. Judge Grayson sat high on his bench, arms crossed, eyes full of skepticism. The opposing counsel barely hid their amusement, smirking as if the outcome was already decided. "Mr. Carter," Judge Grayson began, his voice laced with doubt, "do you understand that this is a court of law, a place for trained legal professionals?" Malik met his gaze, unfazed. "Yes, Your Honor, and I also understand that the law is not reserved for those with degrees, but for those who understand it and apply it correctly." A murmur swept through the gallery. The judge raised an eyebrow but motioned for him to continue. The opposing counsel stepped forward, his voice dripping with condescension. "This is absurd. The defendant's representation should be someone who has at least passed a bar exam. This child—" Malik cut in, his tone measured but firm. "Objection, Your Honor. If my ability to represent this case is being questioned, then let it be based on legal grounds, not personal bias." The judge tapped his gavel once. "Proceed." Malik exhaled slowly before launching into his argument. He systematically cited case laws and precedents, his voice steady, each point backed by documented rulings. He referenced legal history, judicial interpretations, and constitutional protections, leaving no room for doubt. The more he spoke, the quieter the courtroom became. The smirks faded. The judge's expression shifted from skepticism to intrigue. The prosecution's confidence wavered. Then a voice broke the silence. "He's right." Sarah, an investigative journalist covering the trial, had been sitting in the gallery observing. She scribbled furiously in her notepad, her instincts telling her that there was more to this case than met the eye. Meanwhile, in the back of the courtroom, a man named Willis watched intently. A former employee of Victor Grant, he had first-hand knowledge of the corruption that had ruined lives, including James's wrongful conviction. He had remained silent for years, but something about Malik's determination made him pause. Perhaps, for the first time, there was someone brave enough to fight back. Malik stood at the center of the courtroom, gripping his legal pad, ready to deliver his final argument. Every eye in the room was on him, waiting. The weight of the moment pressed down on his shoulders, but he remained firm. Just as he opened his mouth to speak, the heavy doors at the back of the courtroom swung open. 2 uniformed police officers entered, their boots echoing against the marble floor. A tense hush fell over the spectators. Malik knew immediately who had sent them. Victor Grant. This was a warning, a show of power meant to shake him. The officers took slow, deliberate steps toward the front, their presence an unspoken threat. But Malik did not back down. His heart pounded, but he met their stares with unwavering determination. He would not be intimidated. Judge Grayson cleared his throat. "Is there a reason for this interruption?" One of the officers spoke in a clipped tone. "Just observing, Your Honor." A flicker of uncertainty crossed the judge's face, but he nodded reluctantly. "Very well. Proceed." Malik exhaled, steadying himself. He turned back to the jury, but before he could begin, the opposing counsel stepped forward, shifting the attention away from him. "Your Honor, before we continue, we must address the credibility of the witness, Willis Carter." A murmur rippled through the courtroom. Willis, who had reluctantly agreed to testify against Victor Grant, stiffened in his seat. The opposing attorney continued. "Mr. Carter has a history of financial troubles and legal disputes. How can we trust his testimony?" It was a calculated attack, meant to discredit Willis before he could even speak. Malik clenched his fists, but he did not panic. Instead, he quickly flipped through his notes, searching for what he needed. Moments later, he stepped forward, his voice clear. "Your Honor, the defense is attempting to undermine a witness without addressing the facts, but I have gathered additional evidence that corroborates Mr. Carter's statements." He pulled out a stack of documents and handed them to the bailiff. As they were distributed, the courtroom leaned in, eager to see what he had found. The papers detailed financial records, hidden transactions, and connections between Victor Grant and the false charges against Mr. Peterson. The evidence was overwhelming. The judge scanned the documents before looking at the defense. "Do you wish to challenge these findings?" The opposing attorney hesitated, then shook his head. Malik had won this round. But just as victory seemed within reach, chaos erupted. A clerk rushed in, whispering urgently to the prosecution. The lead prosecutor's face darkened as he turned to the judge. "Your Honor, key documents related to this case have gone missing." A shocked murmur spread through the crowd. Malik's stomach dropped. Someone was trying to erase the evidence before it could be used. And then the threats began. That evening, Malik received an anonymous message. A warning. Stop now, or suffer the consequences. He clenched his jaw. They were afraid. That meant he was close. Meanwhile, Sarah, the investigative journalist who had been following the case, dug deeper. Her research led her straight to Victor Grant. She uncovered damning links, not only to Mr. Peterson's case but also to James's wrongful conviction. The next morning, Malik entered the courtroom with renewed determination. This was bigger than he had imagined. The entire case was unraveling, and Grant's influence was slipping. Then, in the most dramatic turn of events, Willis stood up. "I have something else to say." Silence fell over the room. Willis looked directly at the judge. "I was part of it. The corruption. I saw how Grant manipulated cases. I was too scared to speak, but I can't stay silent anymore." The courtroom erupted. The prosecution scrambled, but the damage was done. Malek had forced the truth into the open. Within hours, an immediate motion to reconsider James's case was filed. And then, the final blow, Victor Grant was arrested in front of everyone, charged with fraud and conspiracy. Justice had finally arrived. The verdict was in. The jury foreman stood clearing his throat before reading the decision. "We, the jury, find the defendant, Mr. Peterson, not guilty." A wave of relief washed over the courtroom. The tension that had gripped the air for weeks finally lifted. For a moment, there was silence. Then an eruption of applause. The gallery stood in unison, cheering, clapping, acknowledging the young boy who had defied all odds. Malik remained still, absorbing the moment. He had done it. Mr. Peterson turned to him, eyes glistening with gratitude. "You saved my life," he whispered. The overwhelming evidence not only cleared Mr. Peterson's name, but also forced a reevaluation of James' case. The very system that had wrongfully imprisoned his brother was now forced to admit its mistakes. Malik sat in the same courtroom, days later, as the judge overturned James's conviction. James was free. Tears streamed down Deborah's face as she embraced both of her sons. The weight they had carried for years had finally lifted. The fight was over, and they had won. As the crowd dispersed, Judge Grayson stepped down from the bench. He approached Malik, his expression unreadable. "You have a gift, young man," he said, his voice quieter than before. "Never stop using it." Malek nodded, sensing the sincerity in his words. Outside the courthouse, the community gathered, celebrating not just the verdict, but the courage that had brought them there. Inspired by Malek's determination, a group of young law students announced the launch of a mentorship program. Their goal was simple: to help others who, like Malik, had the passion but not the means to fight for justice. News of Malik's victory spread quickly. Sarah, the investigative journalist who had been following his journey, published an exposé detailing the corruption he had exposed. Her article made headlines, shining a light on the flaws within the justice system and the power of perseverance. Not long after, Malik received an unexpected offer. A prestigious legal mentorship program extended a scholarship. Recognizing his brilliance despite his age, he was invited to learn from some of the best legal minds in the country. Malik sat with his mother at the kitchen table, staring at the letter in front of him. The boy, who had taught himself the law, who had fought for justice without credentials or experience, was now being welcomed into the world he had always dreamed of. "This is just the beginning," his mother said, smiling with pride. And she was right. Malik's journey was far from over, but one thing was certain. He was destined to change the system, not just for his family, but for everyone who had ever been told that justice was out of their reach. Malik and James sat together on the worn-out couch, flipping through an old law book that had once belonged to their late father. The pages were yellowed, the corners creased from years of use. It had been their father's guide, a book filled with notes in the margins, reminders of the fight for justice that ran in their blood. James ran his fingers over the familiar handwriting, a small smile playing on his lips. "You remember how Dad used to read from this?" James murmured. Malik nodded. He always said the law could be a shield or a weapon. It all depends on who holds it. James exhaled deeply, closing the book with care. And you, little brother, have learned to wield it better than anyone. A few days later, Malik found himself outside the gates of the prison that had once held James captive. The steel bars loomed over him, cold and unforgiving. He imagined his brother walking through those very gates, innocent but powerless against the system that had failed him. Malik clenched his fists, feeling the weight of every injustice he had witnessed. "This isn't over," he whispered to himself. "Not until no one else has to go through what we did." He had won one battle, but the war for justice was far from over. He had seen too many people lose everything to corruption and unfair trials. He vowed then and there that he would spend his life fighting for those who had no voice. As he made his way home, the air felt lighter, as if the universe itself had shifted. The house stood just as it always had, but something was different now. For the first time in years, it was not just a house, it was home. James sat on the front porch, his face relaxed in a way Malik had not seen in a long time. He was free, truly free. Malik hesitated before stepping onto the porch. James turned, meeting his gaze, his expression filled with something unspoken, gratitude, pride, love. "We did it," Malik said softly. James stood, stepping forward, his eyes filled with emotion. "I always knew you would." Before Malik could respond, James pulled him into a tight hug. It was not just a hug of celebration, but of relief, of healing. A moment that years of struggle had led to. From the doorway, their mother watched, her hands pressed over her heart. Tears glistened in her eyes, but they were not tears of sorrow. They were tears of pride, of joy, of finally seeing her family whole again. Malik pulled back slightly, looking up at James. "This is just the beginning." James nodded. "I know." The weight of the journey still lingered, but for the first time in years, the future felt bright. They had fought, they had endured, and they had won. But most importantly, they had done it together. Malik's journey was more than just a legal battle. It was a testament to resilience, intelligence, and the unwavering pursuit of justice. He had stepped into a courtroom where no one believed in him, where every glance, every remark, was laced with doubt. Yet he had proven them all wrong. His fight was never just about one case. It was about proving that justice was not reserved for the privileged or the powerful. Anyone, regardless of age, could make a difference if they had the courage to stand up and fight. What began as a desperate attempt to save a friend had turned into something much bigger. Malik had uncovered corruption, exposed lies, and forced the system to acknowledge its failures. The case had sent ripples through the legal world, challenging long-standing practices and shaking those who had once believed they were untouchable. More importantly, it had brought freedom to an innocent man and hope to many others still trapped in the system. News outlets hailed Malik as a prodigy. Headlines praised his brilliance, his determination, and his ability to outmaneuver seasoned professionals. Universities took notice, law firms reached out, offering mentorship programs, scholarships, and opportunities that most aspiring lawyers could only dream of. But Malik was not in it for prestige or recognition. He had a vision, one that extended far beyond a single courtroom victory. James was free, but how many others like him remained behind bars, their voices unheard? Malik knew he could not stop now. He had seen firsthand what injustice looked like, and he had vowed never to turn away from it. He wanted to use what he had learned to fight for those who had been wrongfully convicted, to challenge a system that too often failed the innocent. Standing on the steps of the courthouse, Malik looked out at the crowd that had gathered. He saw reporters, law students, families who had followed the case from the beginning. But more than that, he saw a movement, people who believed in change, people who now knew that justice was not about age or experience, but about truth, courage, and the willingness to fight for what was right. His journey was far from over. But for the first time, Malik knew that he was exactly where he was meant to be.